Okay, welcome to the November 18th, 2019 meeting of the Salina City Commission. I'd like to establish that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been provided.
Yes.
Thank you. Call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call.
Mayor Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hay.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges.
Here.
Commissioner Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Okay, ask if you're able to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, we're going to start with awards and proclamations, and this is special for me because if there's been one person who I've met since I've been here for 20 years who's encouraged me to do things, it's the one who's going to read this proclamation today, so I'll let you formally introduce her.
Item 3.1 in the month of November 2019 is 45 years since the establishment of the Human Relations Commission in the city of Salina. Sandra Beverly will read the proclamation.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I brought a crew with
An old crew.
Well, the proclamation of the City of Salina, whereas this year marks 45 years since the Salina Human Relations Commission was established by the Salina Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action Ordinance, which protects the rights of all with regard to unequal treatment on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, age, physical and mental disability, familial status, national origin, and ancestry. And whereas the Salina Human Relations Commission has a long tradition of leading the way to achieve the idea of freedom and justice for all, and has adopted a mission to eliminate discrimination and to establish equality and justice for all citizens through civil rights, enforcement, advocacy, and education. And whereas the Salina Human Relations Commission, by way of the Salina Community Relations Division, administers a Fair Housing Assistance Program called FAP, which is the only one of two of its kind in the state of Kansas. And whereas the Salina Human Relations Commission upholds the principle of freedom and justice for all, upon which the United States of America, the state of Kansas, and the city of Salina each were founded. And whereas the Salina Human Relations Commission provides an opportunity for all citizens to have freedom of choice and equal opportunity to reacquaint themselves with the rights and responsibilities that are theirs under local, state, and federal laws. Now, therefore, I, Trent W. Davis, M.D., Mayor of the City of Salina, do hereby proclaim the month of November 2019 as the 45th anniversary of the establishment of the Salina Human Relations Commission, and I encourage the people of Salina to join in this observance. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand, caused the seal of the city of Salina, Kansas, to be affixed on the 18th day of November 2019. And I would just like to say that my late mother-in-law, Catherine Beverly, was one of the original members of the Human Relations Commission here in Salina, and I was glad to be asked to do this. I've had the privilege of knowing each director of this department, starting with Will Burnett, Kay Crawford, Gina McDonald, Steve Rivers, and now Evelyn Nelson. And I'm very proud of the work that this office does, and I know that we were unique because when we would go to national conferences, we were only one of a handful that did the kind of work that is done in this office.
I don't know that you need to advertise for more work for the commission, but are there any other activities to, or ways to let folks know where they can reach you or how they can reach you? You want to come up to the podium so people in TV can see the current director?
Hi, I'm Evelyn Nelson. I'm the current director. We don't have any activities, but you can come see us in room 101 here at the City County Building, and we'd be happy to tell you about what we do, and we also have information available about all of the services that we offer, as far as fair housing, employment, and public accommodations discrimination.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
And I want to just say, I'm sorry, did you? No. Oh, I just wanted to say thank you to the commission for supporting the Human Relations Commission. I came on in 1984, which seems like
Decades.
well, it has been
I know, but it seems like
a long time ago. And at that time, I was investigator and was until retirement of Will Burnett, and then I took over as director, and sometime after that, I think, hired Sandy Beverly. But this department does great work in the community, human work. And so many of the other, we don't have all the policies and procedures, although we've got a lot of them. And we took on the job of becoming substantially equivalent to the federal fair housing law during my term, and we saw the passage of the ADA during that time and formed a advisory committee for accessibility issues. So there's been a lot going on. The community is really, I think, much better for having this department or division. But especially want to thank the commission for supporting it, because it's absolutely a necessity to keep those human issues out in front of the public. Thanks again. Thank you. Sandy.
Mr. Mayor, we don't have any activities immediately coming up, but I think Evelyn's being very gracious in not mentioning the amazing event that they just had, a first time for the Human Relations Commission. They had the Diversity event with over 150 attendees at the Field House. We worked with Arts and Humanities and had artists from all over the place doing dance and music and performance art. And it was a very successful event, and definitely something that Human Relations Commission plans to add to their repertoire. And they'll have landlord training in the spring like we do. It's our Fair Housing Day. So that's something else coming up in the spring.
And I would underscore Ms. Beverly's point. I've had reason to look at other communities that have the model that we do, and the last time I looked, I think there were 10 or less in the nation, and of those, even fewer that were similar in population. So I think we are at the leading edge in what we do locally.
And it's one of those very quiet things that, we always forget about, what separates this city from others, what makes it so special. So, thank you very much. Nice seeing you again, Mayor Crawford.
I'll come down tomorrow.
Okay. We are going to go to the Citizens Forum in just a minute. We have not had a regular meeting since the elections, and I want to congratulate Mr. Rod France, who's sitting in the audience for another 8 weeks before he'll take his place up here, since we weren't able to talk Commissioner Hay out of retiring. But, not everyone wins in city commission elections or school board elections, but when you look at the folks who are waiting in the wings for that next election, we still have some all-star candidates out in the community who I hope will stay engaged and work for Salina, because there's a lot of work to do and a lot of hands that we can share it with. So we need to grow those future leaders. So I'm hoping we'll see some faces being involved with the work that we have to get done here. We can now move on to Citizens Forum. Let me back. I'm sorry. And congratulate Commissioner Ryan for
You as well, Mayor Davis.
Thank you. All right.
Hello,
Good afternoon. How are you
Deborah
doing?
Corrales. Can I approach?
Yes, ma'am.
This time we're going to play it.
Thank you.
Is there another DVD? You didn't need one? All right, thank you.
Okay, aside from the DVD that I just gave you, I would suggest life lessons from the victory dogs. These dogs were individually tested with different stimuli, food, people, and other dogs. Of the 48 dogs, only one was deemed too aggressive and was euthanized. 2 were deemed unadoptable and spent the rest of their lives at Best Friends Animal Society. 25 went straight into foster homes or permanent homes. Only 22 out of all those dogs had to have some type of rehabilitation, but all were eventually adopted into families. I also recommend Off the Chain, and I got to warn you, it's a documentary about dog fighting. One dog was losing and his owner decided to stomp his head like 4 or 5 times. They drug these dogs, sharpen their teeth with little dowels or whatever those things are. They sharpen their teeth. They enhance them with steroids. And I also recommend the Champions, Michael Vick's Fighting Dogs. The New York Times bestseller, The Lost Dogs, Michael Vick's Victory Dogs. Little trivia here. Does anybody know who the first president was in the White House?
Adams, wasn't it?
No, Jefferson.
George Jefferson, it was one of the two.
And with him, he brought 2 pit bulls. President Roosevelt and Wilson also had pit bulls. More up-to-date famous people, Norman Reedus, Torrey Smith, Danny Trejo, Rachel Ray, Kevin Bacon, and the list continues for days. Stubby, the most decorated dog in World War I, was a pit bull. He saved the lives of 500 to 1,000 men from gas attacks, caught a German spy by the butt, and was awarded the Purple Heart. Organizations that don't endorse BSL, the ASPCA, Animal Society for the Prevention of Animal Cruelty, the American Kennel Club, American Veterinary Medical Association, the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behaviors, Association of Professional Dog Traders, the Humane Society of the United States, the Animal Farm Foundation, Best Friends Animal Society, and many, many more. All of these experts agree BSL is ineffective, false sense of safety for the community, as well as the welfare and concerns for dogs identified often incorrectly as being the specific breeds. And those dogs that I gave you right there are all almost always identified as pit bulls, and they're not. The National Animal Control Association, BSL, may create undue burden on owners who otherwise have demonstrated proper pet management and responsibilities. Agencies should encourage enactment and stringent enforcement of dangerous, vicious dog laws that are breed neutral. Wellington, Edwardsville, Topeka, and if I mispronounce some of these towns, I'm sorry, I'm not from Kansas. Seward County, Garnett, El Dorado, Besshauer, Ottawatomie, Bonner Springs, Spring Hill, Wellsville, Garden City, Fairway, Lansing, Roland Park, South Hutchinson, Edgerton, Baldwin City, Dodge City, Shawnee, Beloit, Concordia, Pratt, Endora, Belleville, Kansas City, and whatever county this is, I can't pronounce it, I'm not going to try, have all repealed their breed-specific legislations. They don't work. Does anybody know which one's the pit bull there on those pictures? Don't feel bad. The experts say they get it wrong 75% of the time, so. Guess?
Are you going to tell us?
Oh, yeah, I got the answer sheet right here. No guesses? And just so you know, the
Okay.
experts say they get visual identification.
All right, I'm going with this guy.
That's right.
Really?
Yes.
Oh. Got one thing right today. Yay.
But I just want you to know, all these dogs on here are often identified as pit
Okay.
bulls when they aren't.
You have to stay at the... so-
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to give
Well,
you
so
the
so that the
answer.
TV can catch your voice. Okay.
All the dogs on here are almost always misidentified as the breeds that we have banned in Salina. And I don't care if you get 100 dogs in and you get 25% of them wrong, that's not fair. You cannot judge a dog by the way they look and say it's a bad dog. It doesn't work. It's like looking at a human being and saying, you're a bad human being just the way you look. Now I'm going to approach, can I give you the answers?
Well, this will be the end of your 5 minutes, but yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Anyone else to come up?
Good afternoon. My name is Lucas Sharp. I live at 2506 North Chadsworth, Wichita, Kansas. I work for Salina Waste Systems. I'm their commercial account manager, and I cover our district from Hutchinson all the way to Junction City. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Salina Waste Systems, and we're located at 1848 Summers Road here in Salina. As the study session that we had on October 10th, or October 7th, kind of gave an update on the recycling and the solid waste services that I know the City Commission's been working on to try to kind of figure out what they want to do. It was explained in that meeting that we had given specific pricing so that they could kind of determine if it would be a feasible option to look at us as a potential provider for services. And in reference to the meeting that we had on March 29th, we were asked for to see if we wanted to provide services to the current curbside recycling subscription customers, and I believe that's around 800. And so we were kind of vague with our pricing. We didn't give exact numbers because that's adding a service we don't currently offer, but we definitely, over the past 2 years of communication with the city, are very interested in having an opportunity to provide any kind of official pricing for the services in single-stream curbside recycling as well as the solid waste services here in Salina. So I just wanted some clarification on that, as we haven't really been able to. We've met with the park department, or Public Works, I'm sorry, on multiple occasions, and they've been great to communicate with, but just wanted to share that information to the commission. So.
May I ask?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Sure, please.
So Salina Waste Systems is going to be offering curbside recycling pickup for non-waste or non-sanitation customers? I mean, can they opt to do the recycling only, or is that a package in conjunction with sanitation services?
In the meeting in March that was presented to us, it was, would we want to provide the recycling curbside service to the subscription customers? And in our industry, it's definitely about density and quantity of numbers. And so any kind of numbers that would have been thrown out would drastically change if the entirety of the city was something that was an option as far as the residents here. But I know that our division vice president, Eric Bergen, would definitely entertain any type of meeting that would like to have any more clarification on that.
I think our city manager knows how to reach you, Mr. Sharp.
We've spoken once, and
okay.
I know Public Works has their contact information. I think the intention of the conversations offline as well as reporting to you was kind of the question of, is it a private service offered sporadically, or is it a franchised approach, as we've discussed? And I think the franchise approach creates an opportunity for them to have the entirety of the Salina market, and then probably be in more of a competitive bid format where they would offer up a fixed price that we could take into consideration. But I think part of our deliberation is, do we want to go that route in the first place? So we're still kind of preliminary in terms of trying to help you with that decision point first, and then we could have additional conversations with any provider that might be interested.
Okay, thank you.
Norman Mantle, Salina. Being this gentleman brought up the issue of plastic, I was going to speak on it too. Why are we dragging our feet on banning these plastic sacks? Have you got any information back from other cities, what they're doing with it? I bet Mr. Hay would like to see this put in effect before he leaves office. That'd be nice for him, wouldn't it?
It would be a nice parting gift, yes.
Not only for Mr. Hay, but for the city. You banned smoking in the city. Didn't have any problems with that. What is with these commissioners? You're dragging your feet. You're elected to serve us people. We want it done. You gonna move? No?
Where do we, is it on
It
as an
is
agenda item?
calendared, and maybe there's a staff member that remembers off the top of their head. I want to say December 9th. Okay.
Ah, good. Thank you. We're moving. Slow.
In the interest of full disclosure, that's discussion. You
Okay,
won't
okay.
necessarily have an action item that you can vote up or down on December 9th.
But we're moving.
Yep.
But it's getting cold weather, so you're gonna move slower.
We'll be indoors more, so we could work harder.
Well, good, all right. I'm gonna keep prodding you.
I'm used to it.
Got thick skin. Got another issue that's brought up, and it was been discussed in previous meetings. Have you received any feedback, any response from the Attorney General on this KOMA issue? Have they made a decision yet? I mean, you can't discuss it anyway, because that's confidential, but,
No response yet.
oh, okay. Push them, Mike.
They're not one I try not to push down.
Well, you're the city manager, you take that on your responsibility, you can take the heat. But anyway, and because we need to get this mess straightened out. Because I'm afraid this KOMA issue is just wait and see what comes down.
Well, as I think the commission's already aware, but separate and distinct from that, in coordination with our revisiting board and committee training, we've reached out to the Attorney General's office, and we're working on scheduling a public presentation on the Kansas Open Meeting Act, hosted by the city of Salina here in Salina. And I think that it's starting to shape up like December 17th.
Another question, maybe you can't answer it yet. What level of crime was that? Is that a felony, a misdemeanor? You self-reported yourself, so the admission of guilt, and I commend Mr. Bingston, he was the only one stepped up and accepted responsibility that he made a mistake. He apologized. The other 5 didn't. Why?
In fairness to them, it's on staff to carry that out. So I think we acknowledge that the notice didn't go out, and both publicly and to the Attorney General's office. With respect to the nature of the violation, I'll let Greg speak to that.
Anything to do with the open meetings law involves civil consequences, not criminal consequences. There are, not that we would want to violate the Open Meetings Act, but the only consequences are civil in nature, not criminal in nature. It is not a criminal statute. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't make it any less important, but
Right.
to clarify the distinction, it is not a crime to violate the Open Meetings Act. The other point on, and I appreciate the recognition, but what I described as hearkening back, the question was precipitated by a member of the governing body having indicated that they would have liked to have analyzed the potential for self-reporting when notice wasn't given 2 years ago with regard to the strategic planning session. My apology was for not recognizing that that was something that the governing body would have liked to have considered. So just to be sure, there was nothing relative in terms of merit to what was going on at that time. Does that make sense? Well, you juxtapose what I did relative to the commission, but I don't think that's a parallel that can be made in this case. The point was made by at least one commissioner as far as having liked to have been advised of the potential for a self-report under that circumstance. My apology was for not recognizing that that was something that the governing body would have liked to have considered. In my mind at the time, everything had, it had worked out and didn't necessarily warrant that sort of analysis. My apology was for assuming that without asking the commission directly. So it wasn't I did something right, they did something wrong at all. That's the point I'm trying to clarify. I explained that I apologized for not recognizing the advisability of consulting the commission on the question. The commission didn't have an opportunity to address the question by virtue of my not raising it. Does that make sense?
But they are the ones that made the decision to violate this law.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not in any circumstance under these two scenarios. The city commission that's the whole point of the city commission did not and does not have any direct responsibility as a practical matter. Now, if you look at the statute, it refers to, everything is ultimately the city commission's responsibility. As far as the way the matter works, it is staff's responsibility to carry out the necessary notifications on the meetings as required under the Open Meetings Act. My role, and where I had to acknowledge that if I had it to do over again, I would have said in that initial case, rather than expecting that everything had been rectified satisfactorily, or as best as the circumstances would allow, I understood the commission thinking, well, it would have been helpful if we had been given the opportunity, we being the commission, the opportunity in that initial case as to whether there was a self-report. Just like when it occurred again, we recognized, or I certainly recognized in that case, that the self-report was something that the governing body would want to consider. Does that make sense?
Yeah, about this wide. But being there was a second issue, they were aware of this issue.
No, they weren't. They
Not at
weren't.
the outset.
Okay.
They were relying on staff to send out notice, and an error was made on staff's part on behalf of the city commission. So that there was no awareness that I know of by an individual elected official or the collective body of the mistake that occurred until after the fact. There's no intentional nature about it, and there was no prior knowledge.
And I'm going to make a quotation from a former president, see how many of you remember it. It happened in this June of 2017. He was in a public setting. He was addressing the media. It was an industrial setting. I don't know if he was in an airport or what, but there off there behind him was buildings. So he was on the concrete. People were attending it. And he says, power is very addictive. I know, I was there. So we've got elected officials in this country that are abusing their position. But a former president said that. So I think some of our elected officials in the whole country are abusing their power. We need a prosecuting attorney that will arrest and prosecute government elected officials that violate the law. I wish I was an attorney. I'd run for that position. I'd get elected.
After the meeting, we'll meet you out back and find out which president that was. Okay. Anyone else? Citizens Forum? Okay, we'll move on to consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of November 4th, 2019. Item 6.2, award bid for a Nimble HF-20 to Eagle Technologies in the amount of $58,054.57. And item 6.3, approve resolution number 19-7774, authorizing the mayor to sign an agreement to lengthen the tolling period and the consent decree which relates to the former Schilling Air Force Base site.
Is there any item a commissioner would like removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, is there action to be taken on the consent agenda?
Mayor Davis, I move that we approve the consent agenda, items 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Administration, 7.1.
Item 7.1, second reading ordinance number 19-11021, levying Salina Business Improvement District Number 1 service fees for 2020.
Let's get my papers out of mistake. I'm trying to, okay, so we don't have a presentation. We just need to. This was one that was passed on first reading 2 weeks ago. And we have received no comments or any update from staff or any changes
I
in
believe
this?
anything to add.
All right. Any questions, comments from the commissioners or from the public? Bring it back to the commission for action.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve ordinance number 1911021 on second reading. Which, did I read that incorrectly?
I think it was correct. 19-11021.
Are you on 7.2 or 7.1?
7.1.
Sorry.
Yeah. I second.
Okay.
Sorry.
So it's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 19-11021, levying Salina Business Improvement District Number 1 service fees for 2020. We'll vote by roll call.
Commissioner Hay?
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan?
Aye.
Mayor Davis?
Aye, motion carries 5-0. Thank you. And 7.2.
Item 7.2, second reading ordinance number 19-11022, changing the zoning district classification from RS Residential Suburban to PC6 planned heavy commercial on a 1/2 acre unplatted tract of land located on the north side of Beverly Drive, west of Broadway Boulevard, and addressed as 1430 Beverly Drive.
And again, any update from staff on this?
Nothing to add on this item either, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any questions, comments from commission? Any questions or comments from the public on this item? Bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Davis, I move that we approve on second reading ordinance number 19-11022.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve ordinance 19-11022. Again, we'll have voting by roll call.
Commissioner Hay?
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan?
Aye.
Mayor Davis?
Aye, motion carries 5-0. And item 7.3.
Authorize the fire department to terminate its involvement with PMAM, a third-party business currently administering both the police and fire department's fire alarm ordinance administration and billing, and designate the fire chief as alarm administrator.
Chief
Good afternoon,
Royce.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. I'm here today before you requesting permission for the fire department to cease its participation in utilizing a third-party company, PMAM, as the fire department's alarm administrator and collection services for fire false alarms. In August 2015, the City of Salina signed an agreement with PMAM Company to serve as its false alarm administrator and collection service for the police department after a false alarm ordinance was passed by this body for both fire and police false alarms. On December 7, 2015, the fire department signed on per an amendment to the original agreement to allow PMAM to also act as its false alarm administrator. Unlike the police department, the alarm registration and false call ordinance for the fire department only applies to commercial alarm systems that are required per the fire code. This is approximately 220 total within the city. Fire Department's Prevention Division believes we can do this at a much more cost-effective due to three factors. First, our personnel physically inspect each commercial business annually, thus we can verify registration compliance more accurately. Second, the department's new reporting system allows a more detailed and efficient history and record of false calls. Third, on October 1st of this year, the department began using Compliance Engine, another third-party maintenance and testing company that hopefully will bring down the number of false calls due to maintenance issues of these required commercial businesses. The amendment adding the fire department to the PMAM agreement was signed on December 7th, 2015 by then Mayor Blanchard, which allowed PMAM to serve and fulfill the responsibilities of the city's alarm administrator for the fire department. However, Chapter 14, Article 5 of the City Code does establish that the fire chief may be designated as the alarm administrator for the city of Salina. Section 9 of the original PMAM agreement allows that the city may terminate the amendment to the agreement without cause at any time upon 30 days advance written notice to PMAM. We are requesting permission to do this so that the department can begin administration, registration, and collection services on commercial fire alarms, hopefully by January 1st, 2020. Possible actions are, number one, authorize the fire department to terminate its involvement with PMAM with a 30-day notice as per PMAM agreement, and allow the fire chief to be the alarm administrator per Chapter 14, Article 5 of the City Code. Number two, postpone consideration to authorize the fire department to terminate its involvement with PMAM and provide staff direction regarding additional information or amendments to the City Commission would like to request for further consideration. Or number three, do not authorize the department to terminate its involvement and continue utilizing PMAM as the fire department false alarm administrator. Fire department and staff is recommending the approval of action item 1. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, start from the left.
I have none. How much is 28% of revenue collected?
Oh, I may have to go to the finance director. It's our records aren't really good on that, on when they pay, but I think she ran the numbers today.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they retain 28% of what they collect. So 72% gets passed through to us and 28% gets collected, so that's not quite a third of an increase. Plus, we have aggregate numbers for police and fire, and it's a little hard to isolate just fire.
Right,
And fire is vastly less than
Yeah,
the
the
police
numbers I
activity.
ran we collected a little over $37,000 in 2019 so far. That would leave them being paid about $14,500 in 2019, but it is a 28-72 split for the collections.
And that number is across fire and police, and police is probably the vast majority of that number.
That fee also includes the registration fees too, not only false alarm calls, but registration fees. They take the 28%.
Pretty good commission.
How many false alarms do you get a year? Just out of curiosity, I have.
Well, we get more more than are being reported, let's put it this way, through this current company that we're utilizing. There's some registration, there's some alarms out there that need to be registered that we're not, for whatever reasons. So I would ballpark guess, can you think how many you run a month numbers that we get?
There's probably 35.
Yeah, between 20 and 35 a month, possibly.
Is that when I see you flying by my office and then driving back 5 minutes later slowly? Either that or you guys are really fast at putting out fires. I haven't figured out which, so.
More than what you think. And hopefully with the
Yeah.
compliance engine ordinance, that's going to up the maintenance and testing that's done. A lot of times, those false alarms are due to people not maintaining their annual or biannual testing, and that should cut into that too. Our intent is to cut down those alarms.
And I probably need to commend the fire department for their willingness to take this on and try to get a higher level of compliance and customer service and revenue. It'd be awful easy just to continue to allow the agency to do what they can, but they see an opportunity to take it to the next level.
I'm assuming that as administrator, you won't be sitting there sending out the invoices, but is there staff already engaged in similar activity that'll absorb this?
We have kind of had some dry runs with our staff and estimated a staff time of no more than 30 to 45 minutes per week, if that, once we get it going. And that's one of the reasons we figured we can, not only that, but more accurately identify those that are not registering, and as opposed to waiting on another company to send us that information. It just prolongs everything.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Any questions, comments from the public? Thank you. Any action from the commission?
Mayor Davis, I move that we authorize the fire department to terminate its involvement with PMAM with a 30-day notice per the agreement, and allow the fire chief to be the alarm administrator as per Chapter 14, Article 5 of the City Code.
Second.
Okay, this does not really have a item number attached to it.
Motion and vote would suffice.
All right. Been moved and seconded to authorize the fire department to terminate its involvement with PMAM with a 30-day notice as per PMAM agreement, and allow the fire chief to be the alarm administrator as per Chapter 14, Article 5 of the City Code. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. I left a letter doing the PM would require your signature with the city clerk. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 7.4.
Item 7.4, opiate class action lawsuit.
Mayor and Commissioners, I'm Jacob Wood, Deputy City Manager. This is kind of a unique little item that we have for you. About a week ago, we got word from a group of lawyers that there's a class action lawsuit that involves the opioid epidemic. You've probably seen the different things about opioids in the news. There's several different communities across the state and the nation that have taken lawsuits to these manufacturers, distributors, retailers of opioids over the last couple of years. Basically, the intent of these lawsuits is to recover damages that are related to opioid addiction and overdose. That includes things like costs for additional police and fire, emergency medical services, increased burden on the judicial system, increased burden on the healthcare system, and a loss of tax revenue, among many other things. And in your packet, there's a kind of a summary of one of those lawsuits that kind of gives you a much more in-depth list of the things that people are looking at for recovery. This class action lawsuit is kind of unique in that it requires for cities to actually opt out of a lawsuit. Their intent is to gather as many counties and municipalities, local governments as possible. So they've included in their list about 35,000 different local government units, and then they've sent this notice out, and it requires that you either just do nothing to stay in the lawsuit as part of the class action, or that you actually opt out. So the decision for you today is whether we want to stay in as part of this class action lawsuit, or whether we want to opt out and maybe go a different route. According to the website, they have a website that kind of explains all of this. We stand to gain, and this is it's hypothetical, it's really hard to say what the actual number would be, but they've run some calculations, and they've said basically if they were able to get $1 billion settlement from all of their different defendants, in this case there's 13 separate defendants, if they were able to get $1 billion, then the city of Salina would stand to gain about $57,000. So that's, and that would come through a long course of negotiation. Their intent here is just to settle the case. They don't want this to go to a jury trial or anything like that. They just want to settle with those defendants. So $57,000, maybe, is kind of the way to put it there. If we do want to opt out of this case, we have to do that by November 22nd of 2019, so that's why this is in front of you today. If we don't, there will probably not. There might be another opportunity to opt out in the future, but there probably won't be. And that's I know that is not very clear, but this is kind of a unique situation. So if we do decide to stay as part of the lawsuit, we could still decide to do our own lawsuit like some other communities have done, we could go through that process. But if we don't opt out at this point, we're bound to whatever action happens first. So I'll try to explain this. If we stay in the lawsuit and then we do our own separate lawsuit, it really is whichever one of those suits ends first is the one that we're bound by. So so we could stay in this lawsuit and still decide we were going to file something at a later date, or we can stay in and do nothing, or we can opt out and do nothing. Those are kind of the options. So, and what I have laid out for you is the options to either remain part of this lawsuit. No action is necessary to do that. If we want to get out of the lawsuit, then we actually have to file a form that would go back to the law team. We are recommending at this point that we just do nothings. Option one, just to stay as part of the lawsuit. We have made really no attempt as staff to determine what the effects of the opioid epidemic have been on the city of Salina. There are some other legal teams that would take up the case if we wanted them to, but we anticipate that would take a lot of staff time, a lot of legal time, and probably a lot of cost on the front end, with no real guarantee whether we're going to come out successful or not. So with that, I know that was kind of a brief rundown. If you have any questions, I will punt them to Greg. So.
Question?
I don't think I have any questions.
Mr. Brixton, who decides who's in a part of a class? Has a judge somewhere decided that everybody in America is in a class, or is that just the lawyers involved in creating this activity? They've decided that the whole world is in the class.
This process was certainly new to me. And it is a fairly recent development under the federal rules of civil procedure in the federal courts. I don't practice in the federal courts, so that's it just is new. It's referred to as a negotiation class. It's not really, as you can tell, we're not participating in a petition like you normally would think of joining a suit and initiating a suit. It is a relatively new mechanism under federal procedure that enables the identification of this negotiation class, and they have obviously cast a very broad net by naming, as best we can tell, every municipality, city, and county in the country.
If you look through the list on the website, I mean, it's like, cities with 300 people in it. It goes down to a very small level.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there has been a court order that they have the authority
Yes,
to do that. Yes,
it is. In fact, I do have the order from the United States District Court in Northern District of Ohio, Eastern Division. Order clarifying negotiation class certification order. So it has formally been certified by the federal court, which is the trigger then for them qualifying to negotiate with the 13 defendants that Mr. Wood referred to. And I don't know if, and not to get down in the weeds any further than you all might wish, those 13 defendants, as I understand it, can be viewed independently. If we were to separately initiate an action against a subset of those defendants and would somehow reach judgment or a settlement prior to this larger class doing so, we would still be able to participate to the extent that there were defendants with whom we had not settled, that sort of thing. So I think if you can kind of think of them as individual defendants, and we have, any myriad of options, I suppose, but staff has analyzed what they believe to be our best scenario. A crystal ball would be helpful in this situation, but...
So we didn't have to file, we were just automatically put into that suit?
That is, and yes, that's the short answer.
And Mr. Wood referred to it, but we've recently been approached by law firms that instead of doing the class action approach, are trying to line up individual clients that they would file on our behalf on a contingency basis, but that probably involves considerable involvement on the part of staff and legal counsel. They probably have a template approach, but we've still got to true that up as it relates to Salina. And it's hard to say what kind of time and energy and expenses invested in that, as well as what return might come from that.
Maybe you should forgive me for asking the questions and the other commissioners, but if this is a template for the future and you can make a class out of the whole world, out of anything, you spend all your time just discussing whether to opt out of stuff. I am dumbfounded.
Staff talked about whether this needed to come to the city commission with respect to those individual solicitations to initiate a suit on our behalf, as well as this opt-out. And frankly, we certainly didn't want to be past that deadline and then have something transpire and you as the governing body or the community in general legitimately asking at that point, why are we just talking about this now? Why didn't it come to us? So we felt like it rose to the level of sharing it with you before we had a deadline to act. But yeah, we could certainly ride it out, see what happens, and we'll see what the topics are. But this is a new approach to class action suits that we're aware of.
I'm going to look to my left and someone in the medical field. I'm guessing that to try to get your hands or head wrapped around what the actual damage is and how much of an issue the opioids have had in Salina or Saline County would be fairly cumbersome. Would that be a good way to put it?
Yeah, because you have medical expenses, you have lost wages, you have probably law enforcement involvement, you've got, I mean, I don't know, you'd have a long line of somebody wanting a piece of that $57,000, because it goes way beyond just, the medical part, which is the part that I would see, but.
So based on that, you would suggest?
Well, this is, we're not going to have to work any less hard for any amount of money than this.
If there is any money to be had.
Right. I don't see a downside, and I don't see us, I'm speaking just for myself, probably singularly initiating a suit against one of the 13 defendants. I won't name any names, but.
And we tried to excerpt out of one of those example lawsuits what they identified, and they've got A through N, everything from property value loss to cleaning up public parks. I mean, it's just this broad category of possible damages, I guess you could say, that we'd have to demonstrate in some way, it would seem.
So do we need a motion to take no action?
Technically, no, you don't.
Okay, so we can just, okay.
So then I would ask if there's any commission who wishes to take any action?
No.
If not, we will stand educated and advised and let this proceed as it is. Other business. Yes, ma'am.
I have two quick items, both related to this week's city manager update. I just had a couple of follow-up questions. And the first one is about Grand Prairie. Did the Planning Commission put in place a building moratorium in Grand Prairie? Is there one in place right now?
They made them, as I understand it, they took a vote to advise or recommend one. Staff has, and when I say staff, but not so much myself, but Lauren Driscoll and Development Services staff have gone back and reviewed the entirety of about 6 hours of conversation across multiple meetings with the intention of responding to issues and concerns that were raised, taking that back to the Planning Commission on December 3rd, if I remember that date right, with the intention of addressing or speaking more specifically to the concerns that were raised and confirming the Planning Commission's intent with respect to a moratorium. There hasn't been any request for building permits in the intervening time period, so we're really going back to them to address the issues that were raised and confirm what the recommendation would be.
And I guess I just had a question in terms of process. So would that come to this body as a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and then we would take action to affirm or deny, or at least acknowledge receipt of their recommendation?
I don't know that we have something in place that clearly answers that question. Part of our difficulty has been that that's a little bit certainly out of the ordinary, and I would expect that in order to enact a moratorium, it would be at the city commission level that action would have to take place.
Commissioner Hodges, just to add to that, the recommendation for a moratorium was specifically related to the safety of a road, related to fire marshal approval. We've spoken with the fire marshal. There is no immediate danger. We have written confirmation from the fire marshal now. Our hope is, and our plan is, at the December 3rd meeting, to take that item back for further consideration, so the recommendation for a moratorium for further consideration by the Planning Commission, because the moratorium was requested based solely on that misinformation related to the road. So before bringing that before you, we wanted to make sure that all staff who does review that, who gives that feedback, because the fire marshal was not present at that meeting, would be there to advise the Planning Commission before that. But I can tell you that there are no building permits right now being conceived for that.
What would happen if you received a building permit application before December 3rd?
Realistically, we'd probably tell the individual we have some things going on. Would they be interested in waiting?
At
Otherwise,
this point, I think our stated goal for review would either hit or be beyond the December 3rd date. I mean, potentially.
I mean, if somebody came in, we're all humans. I would simply say, ideally, this is under discussion, and before the Planning Commission has a time to address this and their safety concerns, would you mind waiting a couple weeks? If they're like, nope, I want to do this now, then we would probably have to have a discussion and request to either come to you guys immediately. I think one of the things is we've had this conversation with the fire marshal, and there's no immediate danger. And so that is one of the other reasons that, if there had been an immediate danger after immediately talking to the fire marshal, we would have been on the next agenda, but that is there's not an issue of danger at all. And the fire marshal has that in writing, is prepared to be at the Planning Commission to address this.
No road issue, no moratorium?
He would not recommend, he doesn't recommend the moratorium, but the recommendation from the Planning Commission is related to safety and which set of fire laws should apply. And if the subdivision is safe without that secondary access based on the amount of building permits that it has right now or could have. And he is prepared to answer to that. And it is not a safety issue.
And there was some discretion at the outset in terms of the approval.
I know you're behind me.
I didn't see you back there. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mr. Long, but no, I just, basically, my concern is process. And since this happened back in October, mid-October, I think it was like the 15th or something like that, when they recommended the moratorium,
Admittedly, there's been an unanticipated amount of conversation and issues raised. The recommendation of a moratorium is certainly out of the norm coming out of the Planning Commission, and as Ms. Driscoll described, there seemed to be a lot of conversation directed at the road where there wasn't real clear understanding of the discretion that was granted to the fire marshal at the outset of approving Grand Prairie, or the status at the time the recommendation for the moratorium was made. So staff's been trying to kind of track down all the questions and give definitive answers so the Planning Commission can make a more informed decision. Okay. But procedurally, we agree. It left us all scratching our heads, and it's been a little difficult to get our arms around, frankly.
Okay. But any action that the Planning Commission would take in the event that they said,
following December 3rd, if they ratify one moratorium, it'll be back.
Okay.
And we're also not taking the plat forward at that meeting. So we're not trying to get them to do that and take an action. Like, the only purpose of the December 3rd meeting is to go through their safety concerns. And depending on how that meeting goes, whether they want to move forward with a moratorium recommendation or not, we will move from there. But we are not, it's not like we're bringing that forward and then after that, they have to decide on the plat. Like, the whole purpose of that meeting is to deal with their questions and issues.
Safety concerns.
Correct.
Awesome.
And be a full and complete inventory of everything every concern that was raised, and then just kind of walking through them one by one as factually as we can.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that update. And then the last question I had was raised about Native American Month and the misspellings of a couple of street names, and thanks for looking into that, and I acknowledge that they may be consistent with the plat, but
Right.
that they're still misspelled. So I was wondering, what's the process for that? I'm assuming that there's a neighborhood notification, and there's probably something that has to go to the planning commission in terms of getting that input or making a recommendation, and I didn't know what the
You may actually be
process.
catching Ms. Driscoll
I
off
know, I'm
guard.
like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right.
Let me try to traffic cop this a little bit. We did some follow-up, both in terms of Public Works and Development Services staff, and Mr. Wood tracked it down. And so, for everyone's benefit, the concern was raised that Navajo Avenue, I believe, is currently spelled with an H rather than a J.
And
that is-
Arapaho.
and we weren't sure at the time
Right.
whether that was, misspelling over time or whether that had some basis. We confirmed that when it was platted, that was the spelling that was platted. And there was concern about Arapaho being spelled with an H-O-E, I believe, and confirmed that one was, was platted that way as well. Mr. Wood's done some research, and there continues to be reference to Navajo with an H, but I think there's probably national associations that have gravitated to Navajo with a J, so there's probably enough indication out there that Navajo with a J is kind of the norm today. I'm going to put Jacob on the
I
spot
think
a little bit
that's
with
correct
respect to
with
Arapaho.
Arapaho actually is spelled
With an E.
with an E.
Okay.
In most, there's a Arapaho there's both spellings. They do it with an E and with an out, but without. But it is there is an actual tribe that does have an E at the end. So it is not necessarily.
consistent.
It's kind of spelled both ways a little bit. But Navajo on that one, it really is the H is probably incorrect. So.
Or at least out of date. at this point.
For
Out
sure.
of date. Okay, so
And
that
so,
would be.
in answer to your question,
Yeah.
in terms of process, most times we get a renaming request from a property owner or citizen, but if someone, whether it's the city commission or planning commission, wanted to initiate a renaming request of either one of those, the staff could facilitate that.
Okay.
And then, in terms of process, and then we're into public notice, and you pick, regardless of what you're renaming, it's very common to get concerned about having to change whatever it may be. Businesses more so have a lot of documentation that is address specific, but even homeowners don't necessarily like having to have their bills changed. And it used to be, the return mail stamps. I'm not sure how many people use the mail anymore, but.
Thank you.
When a municipality changes the name, the spelling of a street or the name of a street, does it offer financial assistance to residents in that
Personally,
changing?
I typically haven't seen that. That's not to say that we couldn't, and I don't know how you quantify it. I haven't seen that before, but I can't say that some municipalities haven't done that. What I haven't done is, and I don't think staff has either, is try to inventory how many businesses and residences would be affected.
I'm just thinking, even a credit card account, if you misspell your street name and you're trying to buy a plane ticket, one letter, it's not going through. We don't, of course, guys are always accused of not realizing what women have to go through when they get married, but I'm sure it's probably on that level of just, changing one word or one letter.
I just did a quick count, and it looks like there's about 24 residences on Navajo Avenue and no businesses.
That'd be a great way to get rid of unsolicited mail, at least for a couple of weeks.
Well, thank you for that information, and I think it's something that's something to think about.
So then, what we would recommend, if that action wishes to proceed, would be for a resident to initiate the petition, or
There are
the city?
instances where the planning commission initiates a planning commission item. I think you as a city commission could initiate a name change if you so desired.
All right, and we could get a suggested wording for that?
Well,
By the next
I'd
meeting?
suggest
If-
a
or
motion and
is
vote.
it
would
just
be
a
good-
simple-
I was going to say,
Just
if
a
it's just,
simple
if it's
thing?
one
Okay.
person, then, I mean, I think we need to see if there's a consensus, because if there's not a consensus, then it is what it is.
Well,
What I'd like to, I mean, I agree with you, but I mean, I would like to see maybe if the residents have a problem or what impact they feel that it's going to be on them before, we just take effect and say, okay, we want to change the name. I mean, I think it needs to be changed. I think it needs to be in order with the way it's supposed to be spelt. But, if it's a burden on on those 24 residents, I think they need to be contacted and ask them, do you have a problem with it? And show them what the option is and what the consequences is if you do change that name.
Am I understanding, I think if I'm understanding correctly, that option would come at the planning commission level in terms of if there was a lot of neighborhood opposition, then at that point, the planning commission would have a decision to make in terms of
Yeah, I think
staying
there's
or going?
possibly two ways to approach it. Either it could be communication in advance before the action gets initiated, or, if anyone off the street came in and made application, we'd have a notice process and they'd have an opportunity for, a public hearing. In all honesty, I haven't gone so far as to check whether that's a public hearing at the planning commission level or the city commission level. So you could initiate it, and we could be very deliberate in our communication to all those residents that this has been brought up for discussion. You'll have the opportunity to address the commission, or we could try to do some preliminary, communication and get that feedback before you even initiate.
Commissioner Hayes suggests, because we could do the preliminary canvassing, for lack of a better term, and at least have some
It's not like
sense.
we're sending out thousands of notices. I mean, we've only got
Yeah.
a handful of notices to send out and find out.
Again, I think a motion, second, and a vote would be helpful, and if that's to instruct staff to draft that communication.
I'm not even sure those residents will realize what's happening by changing an address. Well,
that's what I mean. I think you need to tell.
It's been this way, it was platted, it's been that way. It may be spelled wrong. I'm not sure we're not creating more work for ourselves and maybe some burden on those individuals that live there that we don't need to.
So just to further clarify, the planning commission would have a hearing on that. So staff report, a very lengthy one, which we are good at for historical background, would be provided. That would also give some information about kind of how this came in front of the community and why this is an issue. So if you were to get that as, essentially the planning commission is kind of that first level for you guys. And we just did that road renaming out of the hotel as an
Right.
example.
Coach
And
like
so,
Bacta.
yep. So they would have that kind of chance to have that staff report, to have that information. That's a really great place in which you'd get that feedback, like, no, we don't like this, we do like this.
Which that affected one business that's there.
But
Yeah,
that
the
would
notice
be
was a
only
lot
if they
easier.
came.
Yeah,
The notice and conversation was a lot easier.
Yeah.
true, but I mean, if the question is, do you get a public meeting?
Right.
Right.
Right, but in that scenario, that would only occur if they came to the meeting,
Or they can send comments in writing.
which would be, and I think Commissioner Hayes' approach might get more feedback, and then we could certainly decide to then go to that.
Yeah.
that
In
stage,
either
but-
instance, they would get notice. Everyone that had joined the street to be renamed would get notice and be made aware of the opportunity to provide comments in writing or to attend the public hearing. So then it just kind of becomes a stylistic issue of whether you want to contact them in advance before you initiate something formal, or whether the process gives them enough opportunity that you want to start with making application for a change.
When we were looking into this, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just an error on the sign. So we did go back, and the justification was it matched the original plat or intent. But we did talk about just internally the unintended consequences of affecting every bill, every credit card, their driver's license, birth certificates, the U.S. mail service, that it's not something to be just done without significant notice and potentially impact, so.
Well,
Wow.
Yeah,
In my opinion, it'd leave well enough alone.
that's kind of where I'm at.
I agree. I mean, if we just leave it as it is, if one of the citizens want to come forward and bring it forward and say, hey, then maybe we'll take another look at it, but I agree with that. I guess I never thought about the birth certificates, about everything else. I mean, that's a huge, huge thing to tackle.
Well, the birth certificate, I mean, people move 30 times in their life. It's just, as long as you know where you were born, I think. Your birth certificate's probably safe.
Driver's license, I mean.
Yeah.
It comes out.
The driver's license, yeah.
Yeah. So.
I make a motion, we adjourn. Second.
Okay, I was going to say, wow, that's, okay, that requires a second as well. Before we vote on that, there is a second meeting that will begin, it says immediately following the adjournment of this meeting. We could add a 5-minute break, and we will reset the seating for that. And that's going to be in this room here, correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, all in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.
We'll return at
The seating.
17?
Or you have to change signs.
Well, if it's going to be on,
Can he just run it from there?
I can. I don't know why.
if it's going to be on
In a moment here, I'll be calling to order the Salina Fieldhouse Qualified Active Low Income Community Business, Inc., the QALIC-B, a special meeting. I am the president, and we just didn't want to move all of our things around here, so if it looks funny that the person to the left is presiding, that's why. Before I call to order, I'd like to request that staff has confirmed that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Do we need a roll call of the membership, or can they?
Probably wouldn't hurt.
We'll have a roll call.
Carl Ryan.
Here.
Trent Davis.
Here.
Joe Hay.
Here.
Melissa Hodges.
Here.
Mike Hobbick.
Here.
Thank you. Item number 2, approval of the minutes. We have the minutes to approve from June 10th, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. We'll move to new business. 3.1, we have a staff presentation.
Yes, Mr. Cotton's very prepared for this with the assistance of staff. As you know, this has been an ongoing issue for quite some time, pretty significant point of conversation. I think Mr. Cotton's going to get into the extent of the due diligence that we've done over a length of time now, and I feel like we've kind of brought it to a conclusion. We have representatives of Crossland that have been in the conversation all along, and they're here today as well. So more than happy to turn it over to Mr. Cotton to give you the details.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I guess good evening now. Yes, for the past 3 years, staff has been monitoring the cracks that developed in the fieldhouse floor during construction of the facility by Crossland Construction. Staff took pictures of the initial cracks on November 14th, 2016, and voiced concern to Fruit Development on December 27th and January 5th, December 27th of 2016 and January 5th of 2017, as more cracks were developing and initial cracks were elongating. This concern prompted Fruit to have Walter P. Moore, the facility engineer of record, investigate the cracks, and a field observation report was issued on January 16, 2017. This report indicated the cracks were not of a structural concern. On June 22, 2018, a follow-up report was generated by Walter P. Moore. This report detailed more in depth the reasons for the cracking and also made mention of the fact that the cracks were not of a structural concern as there was no notice of vertical separation. Walter P. Moore in this report is of the opinion that the cracks are a serviceability and aesthetic issue. On June 10th, 2019, the city and Crossland entered into a supplemental agreement to further investigate the reasons for the cracking, tests for subsurface issues, and then bring forth a recommendation to the QALIC-B for remedy. This investigation was thorough and detailed. Mr. Jim Manley was brought in by the city as a structural engineer to review the project on behalf of the city. In Mr. Manley's report, he reports that the floor slab is not a critical structural element for the stability of the structure. Mr. Manley does feel the cracks are excessive. Staff worked with Jim Manley and Crossland to develop a repair option as directed. Representatives of Crossland are here to answer questions. Crossland has not shirked in response to asking to help remedy the situation, has been very positive to work with during this remediation issue. The information submitted to the QALIC-B is extensive, and at this time, staff and Crossland are prepared to field questions. At the end of the discussion, staff does recommend moving forward with a resolution to repair the floor as laid out in the document. This would include removing and replacing a 22-foot by 39-foot area of concrete and unsuitable soil in the area of the foyer where the cracking is the worst, filling a slight void in the north gym with a suitable flowable material, and then adding a luxury vinyl tile in the main foyer and the spectator area north of the gym. This time we would field any questions. I know the report's lengthy. I didn't want to sit up here and read every single page to y'all. That we would miss the 7:15.
If I could, there are a few highlights possibly for the listeners at home that probably are worth covering. So as Chris mentioned, Walter P. Moore did an extensive review of kind of the installation methods that contributed to the cracking, as well as determining it was aesthetic and not structural. And so in summary, both in terms of the installation of reinforced wire mesh and its placement in the concrete, it was low. The timing of cutting contraction joints was late, which contributed to cracking other than the location of the expansion joints. But the placement of that reinforcing mesh caused it not to be cut and maintain some stability from a vertical separation standpoint. Concerns came up about subsoil conditions because of the location that Mr. Cotton indicated would be removed. That caused us then to do core sampling, caused us to go back and look at all the soil testing that was done as the site was being constructed, inventory all the locations that were called out as having subsoil that needed amending, essentially. And bear in mind, this was a site of multiple properties and a former gas station and a swimming pool, and so there were isolated locations where it was identified that soil needed to be removed and replaced. So in an effort of due diligence, we core sampled every location we could get to that had previously been identified. We couldn't get to the ones under the hardwood court, basketball court, or the ones under the courts in the north gym, with the exception of one that we cored while the north gym flooring was being replaced. So we core sampled every location we could get to that had previously been identified as possibly needing subsoil replaced. We were able to confirm the quality of the concrete and the quality of the subsoil in all those locations. The one location that was identified as having subsoil and void issues is the section being removed. We think that there's definitely a utility line running through there, so we think it was probably correctly installed and compacted, and then it was excavated as a part of that utility line going through, which contributes to the problem that we experienced today. On top of that, then, when we identified the void around the water fountain, if you're familiar with that location, that then caused concerns about could we possibly have voids elsewhere. So we used ground penetrating radar to test all the location of the building that ground penetrating radar could potentially work. There was the location that we've identified didn't show up in the ground penetrating radar, which then caused us to have questions about the accuracy of the ground penetrating radar. Really, I think to Troy Reiner and DJ McClenney's credit, they recognized that the way they went about the ground penetrating radar test was with handles or on a dolly, that it made it too cumbersome to get around the water fountain. So they came back and did it by hand, removed it from the apparatus, and then they were able to identify the void. So we've now tested everything we know we can get our hands on from a core testing standpoint and a ground penetrating radar standpoint. Confirmed all that with two different objective third parties, Walter P. Moore and Jim Manley, put together a recommended solution. It is luxury vinyl tile in place where the carpet is today and in place of where the The stained concrete is available for public view, not including the concession area or the storage area. And then spent quite a bit of time trying to work with an interior designer in terms of coming up with a luxury vinyl tile solution, a color scheme that fits the existing color scheme of the building. And I'm gonna, being colorblind myself, I'm gonna take a step back from having an opinion on that, but we tried to work that through the Parks Department. We did have some conversation about, is luxury vinyl tile the right solution? We went into it with a preference for epoxy, but we're frankly kind of surprised. The luxury vinyl tile comes with a 15-year warranty. Epoxy doesn't. And we hear this point made both in terms of carpet tile and flooring tile. If you have a problem that needs to be repaired, you can pull an individual tile and repair it versus a uniform solution, whether that's carpet or epoxy. Everything needs to come up, or it's difficult to fix an isolated problem. And then ironically, right after we had that conversation, we had an incident with one of our pieces of equipment, the battery springing a leak and dropping battery acid on the stained concrete and causing an issue. If we'd had epoxy, that probably would have been damage that we wouldn't have been able to repair as seamlessly as we would with tile. So Crossland, by way of the original agreement, has already agreed to a 5-year warranty once the solution's in place. Luxury vinyl tile also allows for installation after hours, so we can keep the schedule of the field house going and have them do their work through the night and then clean up and get out of our way during the day, where epoxy is probably an entire shutdown across the board. And even after you've got that done, then you run into odor issues that we've experienced with the varnish finish work on the hardwood courts. So that's a long way of saying we took quite a bit of time to just kind of continue to do due diligence as we tested one thing and another issue arose. I think the other thing worth noting is, this extended amount of time has allowed us to go through a number of seasons and verify that we haven't seen vertical separation over, 2.5, 3 years now. So we haven't seen it so far, don't have reason to see it going forward, and have a solution that both staff and Crossland find agreeable.
Commissioner, questions for staff?
I got a couple. I guess in reading it says the city has reason to believe that the cracking should not result in vertical separation. I guess, is the reason that Crossland's name's not on there is that they don't want to take the chance of liability if something does happen?
Well, in all honesty, it was really for objectivity. I assume you wanted to hear from us that city and our representatives reached that conclusion, not Crossland, who might be viewed as having a vested interest to reach that conclusion. I think they agree with that conclusion. We were just trying to report that as city, looking out for the city interest, we came to that conclusion.
It also says that Crossland said that they would, a 5-year warranty. Does that mean after the 5 years that they're released from any liability or anything after that 5 years? So 6, 7, 8 years
Sure.
down the road, we have vertical separation, or we have,
Right.
it would be on us.
That is true. 5 years is beyond what the original contract was, and then you add to it the 3 years that we're into at this point. So they're basically 8 years out of completion of the project. And hopefully, if we're going to see anything, we'd see it in those 8 years. But if it crops up after 8 years, then we'd have to, wherever it occurs, we'd have to address it in terms of removing tile and fixing it and then putting tile back or whatever the case may be.
If the vertical separation occurred under the basketball floors, is there a way to know that if you're not doing special? I'm amazed at the test that
Until you see deflection in that playing surface, probably not. Ground penetrating radar wasn't effective over either sets of basketball courts.
And the wooden court is a floating floor, so it has multiple layers of wood and cushion underneath it before the actual playing surface. So if it were to vertically separate, eventually we would see it, but initially I don't think we would, just because of the way the floor is designed.
Okay. So if the balls start rolling downhill when you
Yes, sir.
when you place it on, okay. And for the heavy floor work, would that require a shutdown for a couple of weeks?
You mean for the lobby work and the plan would be to do it at night after staff was
Oh,
gone
so
for the
that-
day. I mean,
even
we would
that
still
would be
have,
at night.
we would still have
Okay.
construction areas, but those would obviously be partitioned off. So the plan would be to work at night so as not to interrupt fieldhouse operations. And Travis is highly concerned about that as we are very busy over there starting now through the spring.
So I know that's the plan with the tile. Is that also the plan with the concrete work?
Okay.
Yes, that is the plan.
Okay.
Other
Answer
questions?
my question.
I have some. Couple questions. One, you've answered, no vertical movement. Have we seen any settling of the main structures? Has that been viewed? We're not seeing any.
We haven't seen any settling in that manner. We did have to go back in and add some, what are they called, Troy, in the brickwork, stress? Control joints in some of the brickwork where the building had, some of the brickwork had settled a little bit, but nothing in the main flooring.
What is the thickness of the concrete floor?
That's a
5 inches? Okay. Pictures are deceiving. It looked like a foot, depending on what angle you take them and how close. On the lobby, on the vinyl, I take it those are squares, you said. Do we have an agreement to have a certain amount of additional squares available? Because
we will have top stock. I don't know how much off the top of my
Okay.
head, but we will keep stock just like we did for the carpet.
Okay.
And Crossland's agreed to
Yes,
provide
they have.
that initial
Okay,
inventory.
that was the next question. The other thing, under Mr. Manley's letter, his last sentence said, "I suggest that the floor elevation be surveyed annually for the next 5 years to confirm that difference movement is not occurring because it's all going to be covered." Who's going to pay for the surveying?
That's a good question. I guess, Mike?
I'm gonna
I
put
would,
DJ
I
on the
would
spot on
ask
that one.
that to be a part of the agreement with Crossland, if they would agree to that.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You said yes.
Oh,
You just
okay.
said yes.
Okay. Looking through this, I'm somewhat disappointed in the way it was done, obviously, and Fru also was our representative, which I think has obviously let us down in this. Not sure how the mesh wasn't pulled up, and again, I don't know who was overseeing that. I know there was a third party, I'm taking it, that did the concrete work, that was a sub
Yeah, I assume
for
so.
Crossland. And it's been a lot of years, but from working construction during college, that's one of the things you did, is you always had a hook on your puller, and you always pulled the mesh up. So the disappointing thing is that's concrete lane 101 that's caused us our issue, and so that's the disappointing part. Other than that, it's a beautiful building, and I wish we weren't having to deal with this. I do feel comfortable, I think with this, the fact that we've had 3 years and we're going to have another 5 that addresses the vertical movement. So anyway, I appreciate all the hard work that staff's done to try to get to this point. And in some cases, I think this delay has actually been good because it's given us, additional time to see if we had any other new issues. Again, I was at the alley the other day, and I noticed they have significant cracking in their concrete floors too, so.
Yeah, for what it's worth, as we pursued one question, if anything arose, the example being the core sampling that then identified a void, then we tried to track that down in terms of ground penetrating radar, and then when ground penetrating radar failed to identify the void, then we tried to, so it was kind of on staff's part, we tried to be mindful of really chasing these different issues down so we could reach as much of a definitive conclusion as we could before we brought it to you. And that took some time.
There's not a representative of Fru Corporation here this evening?
Nope.
Nope. Something that stood out to me, and probably I saw this information earlier, but it didn't really sink in until I read it in the staff report this time, is that the cracks manifested themselves, in some cases, in less than 3 days of the concrete having been laid. We're talking about a difference between November 11th and November 14th. And was it FRU that documented these cracks?
It was me.
And I want to thank you for that, because if it hadn't been for your due diligence, we might not even be having this conversation. So maybe you need to speak to the folks at FRU and see if they'd like to compensate you for your documenting, because I, for one, really appreciate it, and I'm glad that you were on top of it, and I'm glad you were taking pictures. I just want to, something that Commissioner Hoppick said in terms of the placement of the wire being Concrete 101. You know, we have noted at least 3 items in terms of the concrete work, and this isn't a question for you, I guess it could be more a question for Crossland. We have noted 3 separate instances where the concrete was not laid correctly, whether that looks like the welded wire being at the wrong place, the control joints weren't cut at the right time, and that the control joint structural details were not, the specs weren't followed. I am really glad that we have opinions from consultants that indicate that they don't expect to see any vertical cracking from this. But I guess I would just like, I think it would be appropriate for Crossland to share how we could have had these multiple failures on the laying of a concrete floor.
Thanks. So my name is DJ McClenny. I'm the Area Vice President for Crossland Construction. Regarding the quality control and the laying of those items, I can't quite speak to that. I wasn't here at the time, and those involved with the project are not any longer with us. It is common that, as Mr. Hoppick mentioned, that there's always somebody who's pulling that up, and it is Concrete 101 to ensure that somebody is always keeping up with that. It is also Concrete 101 to ensure that you're cutting joints at the right time. So those two are very clear. In regards to joint detail and whether or not wire is stopping and starting at locations, that is an engineer's preference and is not always the same from time to time. So I do agree with those statements, and it just didn't happen in this case.
And this is something that my fellow members of the governing body have been more accommodating in terms of searching out a solution, because if this were my driveway that you had done, I'd be having you take the driveway out and repouring it. So given the fact that we couldn't do a lot of investigating underneath the hardwood floors, if this were your driveway, what would you do?
Well, for one, we treat every building, or I do, as if it is mine. And that's why I'm very thankful for the testing that's been done to certify that it is not a structural component. I do believe that had this been carpeted, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation because we wouldn't even know about it. So we do know it's not a structural issue, so I feel very comfortable with it. We do have the one area that had the settling out in front. It's a very logical explanation as to why that's there, so we feel good about that solution. In fact, we kind of came to there from the very beginning that said, there's a plumbing line here, we've seen this before. More than likely, this whole pad was built to a certain degree. Somebody came in, trenched a line in, the backfill they used must not have been good. So that's a common thing that you see, and we kind of go straight to that. So the fact that we've got the third-party engineers to certify that really helps that.
And with all due respect to not wanting to interrupt programming, I mean, I get that. I mean, you're building up your clientele in the business right now, but if we paid for a floor to be built to certain specifications, if we specified that we wanted polished concrete, which I understood to be the selection of polished concrete as the material was for its exceptional durability and the unlikelihood that we were going to have to replace any flooring practically for the foreseeable future. And now I'm seeing that we're getting vinyl, and I understand that it's a luxury vinyl. I mean, a luxury vinyl seems a little bit like an oxymoron to me, but that luxury vinyl it has the potential, well, it's going to wear out. It's going to need to be replaced. And further, if we do, it may be masking more problems. I guess my question is, why not just stick with the stained concrete and leave it exposed and let those cracks show for, so we can keep a better eye on them and monitor them better than we could underneath some sort of a floating floor structure with vinyl on top of it. I mean, I would rather be able to see the problem happening than I would have it hidden, because at the end of the day, it's a concrete floor.
And there are examples of public facilities in the community that, you know, I don't know how to compare the extent of cracking, but they have concrete floors with noticeable cracking in them. I mean, we certainly went down the road of the cracking was it was a concern, it wasn't acceptable, and staff tried to bring to you a solution that addressed the structural question and tried to aesthetically address the cracking.
Right. And I guess my question is, it probably goes, I understand staff has bent over backwards. I mean, you've consulted, you've, bored and surveyed and ground penetrating radar and all of that kind of stuff. But I guess it's more looking at my fellow members of the governing body in terms of, I just keep coming back to the question of, if this were my project, if this were at my house, would this be an acceptable solution? And for me, that answer is no, especially if I were, doing a project that was like a $10 million, $12 million project. And at the end of the day, I've got a floor that we hope is going to hold up, but it's not what we contracted for. So I'm just having all kinds of issues with this. If these errors just hadn't been so fundamental, and I was not aware of the fact that we had brickwork failing as well. I mean, I appreciate that you weren't here at the time, but I can't imagine that this is the kind of thing that Crossland wants to put on their resume.
Yeah, and speaking to regards of the brick, so there's not an issue with the brick. The issue with the brick is that every so many feet, you need to install a vertical control joint to allow some movement to happen. And so we came back and installed those joints.
Okay.
So
that problem has been corrected?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
See, the only problem I have with leaving the floor the way it is now, I mean, I've been to the field house, I don't know how many times with my grandson playing soccer, and my granddaughter playing volleyball, and my grandson playing basketball. But if you walk into that place and you've got a whole bunch of people standing around, I don't know how many of them asked me, did you see these cracks? Did you see these cracks? Everybody's asking about the cracks in the field house floor. And I don't think they want to be reminded about the cracks in the field house floor anymore. Why I really think that the vinyl, as long as we're somewhat sure that we're not going to have any vertical cracking or separation, that we can, I don't know, I don't want to call it putting lipstick on a pig, but I mean,
but it is.
But if we can put something out to where you walk in that front door and you're looking at the beauty of the building and the beauty of the way that, the basketball courts and the turf fields and everything that you're looking at, and you're not looking at the floor to see cracks. You're looking at a luxury vinyl tile. I mean, I don't know what a luxury vinyl tile is either. I've laid a lot of tile, and I mean, to me, that must be just, the top of the line expensive vinyl tile is what they're talking about. But I would rather not see the cracks in the floor no more, or have the public see the cracks in the floor no more, since we've talked about it so much, and have it fixed to where it looks nice when you walk in, and all you're worried about is those kids playing in that field house.
If it helps at all, you know, as we were designing the project, we spent a lot of time value engineering to try to get on budget, and the flooring surface was one of those discussions. I can't say with absolute certainty, you know, what Plan A was, but I do know that we had conversations trying to weigh stained concrete versus some other flooring system, and so we ended up at stained concrete, admittedly with the expectation that, you know, it would show well. There is some maintenance associated with, long-term maintenance associated with the stain and the finish of concrete. I can't give you the cost savings, the cost difference between installation and maintenance of luxury vinyl tile and
I can help
concrete.
a little bit with that, but like the polished concrete that you have now does require a once a quarter new application of a sealer, and then a once a year complete re-application of the sealer that's there. The luxury vinyl tile requires nothing except a dry mop and then an occasional, you know, you can use a machine or a wet mop to go over it. I can tell you that with all of the design work that we assist with, when a client asks us for a polished stained concrete, we generally say, fine, we can do that, but you need to understand the issues that are inherent with that product selection. And sometimes it's a little bit of careful what you ask for, because in managing expectations and ensuring that, you know, concrete cracks where it's supposed to crack, because it will, and kind of going through that. The issue that was noted with the acid is a very real problem. High pH cleaners can be a problem. You know, those things are just, it's kind of there for you to, hopefully it works out fine, but sometimes it doesn't with an issue like that, or with issues of an acidic footprint tracking across the deck. So what we do know with these 20 mil wear layers with the LVT, you know, it's a 15-year warranty from the manufacturer, and that's just something that you don't get from a polished and a stained concrete or an epoxy or several other products. So from our aspect of it, we believe in it. We've seen it work. It has worked. It's and you've got some limitless options to create that wow factor that you talked about, where you walk in and you're kind of, wow, this looks good.
What does that 15-year warranty cover? Does it cover like fading? Does it cover tears? What does that warranty actually cover?
It covers normal wear. So you've got the fading, the color, the breakdown of the top coat, the wear layer from the base layer. I have to get into all the fine print, but you know, what it is it's certainly not the 1-year warranty, you know, or even a 1-year workmanship warranty that you get with a polished or a stain.
And the tile will replace the carpet as well.
Yeah, that was really kind of at staff's preference, seeing how the carpet's performing. So we felt like, number one, that we needed to address the cracking beneath it, and our preference would be something other than carpet in that location.
There was also concern from our ADA advisory board on the carpet.
There was also an issue, originally when the field house opened, the ADA board, accessibility board, was concerned, even though the carpet performs within limitations or specifications, there is a small lip, and they were concerned about people in walkers tripping over that, and this was just an opportunity to address that at the same time.
Good idea.
Further questions for
One last question for staff, I think. Are there any notification requirements about entering into this agreement in terms of like the tax credit people? Have we kept our donors in the loop?
The tax credit people, we have ongoing updates with them, and the way this has been approached, and maybe it's in the report, but there's a sizable amount that's been withheld as retainage, and so from a new market tax credit standpoint, that's what they've been interested in, is when are you going to get that released and we can close out this project? And I literally had a conversation with them last week, giving them an update of today we were going to be taking it up, and they seem fine with that. From a donor standpoint, I don't know that we've heard anything from donors, and we haven't had any questions we haven't reported out.
Any other questions? I have one final question for Crossland. Commissioner Hoppig mentioned Crossland bearing the future cost of the recommended yearly examinations of the leveling. I saw you
Yeah, we'll take care
saying
of
yes
that.
back
Yeah.
there, but I just wanted
Sure.
to. Okay, thank you very much.
So that probably represents an amendment to the agreement that you'll want to address in your motion.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address this matter?
One other question. In our original operating plan, we had money escrowed or set aside every year for routine floor maintenance, wall, and just, the regular upkeep. I'm assuming for a floor that we anticipate replacing in 15 years, we need to set
We
up.
have budgeted maintenance, but I think the escrow you're thinking of is at Kenwood Cove. And that's a minimal escrow, but we did set some aside for the aquatic park. This one's kind of considered more of a annual budgetary item.
So that floor replacement would, I don't know what that much tile would cost, but that would be reasonable just to do on a one-time appropriation 15 years from now.
Somewhere out in the future, we're going to be refinishing the hardwood basketball
That's true.
courts and replacing the tarquette. I think that's what it's called. There's going to be ongoing
Costs.
maintenance, so we're going to have to budget as needed out in the future.
Thank you.
Sure. Other discussion? Did the public care to comment? We kind of cut you off. Next item is a request for an executive session. Are we?
And that was really just placed on the agenda in the event that you had questions that came up that necessitated that. Staff hasn't identified a need for executive session. We just thought, depending on how the conversation went, it might become necessary. I'll defer to you, but I don't know that
If
the need's arisen.
Consensus is to do without the executive session, and the agreement is looking satisfactory, maybe with an amendment. Are we prepared to take action?
Yes.
President Ryan, I move we approve a resolution approving a supplemental addendum to construction contract between the Salina Fieldhouse Qualified Active Low-Income Community Business, Inc., a Kansas not-for-profit corporation, and Crossland Construction Company, Inc., a Kansas corporation relating to the Salina Fieldhouse construction project, with an amendment adding the requirement that Crossland will be responsible for a floor elevation be surveyed annually over a 5-year period from the time that the current work is completed.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes 4-1. Is there unfinished or other business?
From staff's perspective.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned.